And welcome to a very special edition of what we're doing here tonight, which is a live event talking about everything that Olga and I have been learning about this burgeoning surveillance state that we've been observing is happening. And Olga Lautman from Trump Tyranny Tracker is here, plus the Kremlin Files and Unmasking Russia. Olga, nice to see you as always. I'm gathering you're exhausted as I am, but these are difficult times, but nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. These are nonstop times, and it feels like some scientist really needs to measure the time span because 1 week of Trump feels like a decade. I
It
mean,
really does.
someone
And
really needs to put
by
a
design
scientific
sometimes, you
study
know,
into that because it's unreal. I feel like a full week, really. Like it feels like last year.
they want to overwhelm you. They really do. And I think they want to overwhelm society. So they do this on purpose,
Yeah.
and I think that it's important to just try to take as much time to reflect on what's been happening. Earlier on, I actually did it. I was thinking, are we at a totalitarian state yet or not? And I did like a top 10 list of what are the top identifiers of a totalitarian state. And then looking at where we are in some of those cases, and I won't go through them all, but things like the media is controlled by the state. I mean, we've already started to seeing things like the legal bullying of media institutions. You've got, hey, Dean Blundell is here. Hi, Dean. How are you?
Hi,
Um,
Dean.
you're so sneaky, but I see you there. So
And I thought we were going to be on tomorrow,
you
but
can just join us if you want. You can just join the show. So let me know if you want to. I was talking about the media being bullied by all these lawsuits that they're putting up against them. You got CBS having a lawsuit. You got others just having a lot of self censorship. You've got in the legal front where one of the key identifiers of a dictatorship is that the legal system is co-opted by the state, and then you've got people like Donald Trump telling Pam Bondi to start investigating to people who spoke out against him. You've got this real political retribution happening through the DOJ, which is a big sign that a dictatorship is coming. Then you've got people like Senators Murkowski today that she is afraid, very afraid of standing up to the regime, which is another typical sign of dissent being quashed by the administration. You've got these events like happening like the MTG the town hall this week where they were tasering people. I mean, those are signs of a regime, a dictatorship trying to absolutely violently control any dissent. And it may look like just an isolated incident or two, but I think what's really happening, and as well with the universities and Harvard and all these other things, what they really are doing is they're testing the limits of how far they can go. In
Mhm.
each of these categories, they're trying to say, how far can we push when we send undocumented immigrants or even citizens to El Salvador? How much of a resistance are we going to face from the courts or from public opinion? And the end analysis is that we're pushing back a lot, and we need to push back even harder. But the fact that they're doing this on a coordinated basis means they really are interested in the end goal, which is a dictatorship, which is where we're going. By the looks of all of this, when you look at all these different events happening at the same time, it does feel like we're heading into a total dictatorship.
Absolutely. So, being that I deal with Russia, and I mean, I know quite a lot about dictatorships. When Trump ran for office in 2015 and 16, and just the tactics he was using, the things he was saying, and then by 2017, the things he attempted to do, and throughout his first term. I was screaming, this is a dictator. I can tell you, anyone from Eastern Europe, we could smell them in our in a coma. This is like you just automatically sense these tactics. Are you here?
Uh-oh. I
There you
something happened with my
are.
phone. I might disappear at times. I don't know why. That was weird.
Oh,
But there you
a
go.
ghost.
Wonder why. Is this something we're talking about?
I know.
Okay.
It used to happen on
Us-
my podcast, and I used to say the Kremlin gremlins are
oh
coming.
yeah.
Especially when I used to speak with CIA, like former CIA people,
Yeah,
interview them. The internet in my house, no fail. I'm not kidding you. It happened 7 times. The internet in my house was just shut off, and I would have to call into my podcast. And specifically, when I spoke with former CIA people,
really.
and I was
I
like,
used to
"It's
get that a
either,
lot of people. My phone conversations cut off, like in the middle of it. I
yeah,
hit it. I started talking about something they didn't want you to talk about. It would suddenly be cut off. It's very weird,
yep."
very
So back
disheartening.
to Trump,
Yeah.
so I was warning throughout the first. I mean, my Twitter, if you look at that feed, I was calling him a dictator in 2016, 2017, a Russian puppet because, I did a deep dive on him. And he attempted what he's doing now. He attempted to do all of this the first term. The thing is that we had the people like, John Bolton and Milley and others who were the
John Kelly.
guardrails.
Yeah.
Yep. And they served as the guardrails, and at the time he still didn't fully have the Republican Party co-opted.
Hmm.
Um, but after election, I wrote an article, now that America elected a dictator, here's what to expect.
Hmm.
In November, basically using what happened in Russia step by step. In Russia, it was a little bit easier because the system is a corrupt, rotten, cruel, brutal system for centuries. So, I mean, there it's just a matter of taking over and putting your own crew. And literally, as the days are going and I'm tracking this, it's like checking off everything. And I basically in that article, a very long guide, said what was going to happen domestically by each agency, and then on the foreign front, what he would do. And sure enough, he's, literally following what, I mean, every dictator does. I can talk about Putin, but every dictator. And we're not in a full dictatorship yet,
Mm-mm.
but Trump is doing everything to get us there. I
And
mean,
would
right now we're still resisting, but Trump is doing that's his intentions.
And the resistance is so important, right? And each of these things, each of these little tests that they're having, and to see how far they can push the judicial system and how far they can push the public, we have to resist. And it's so good to see Harvard, and other universities realizing this, that they can't just acquiesce. The same thing with the legal firms who are busy there lining up and making deals. We can't do that. We can't. We will have no country left if they continue to give in to these whims of this administration. We're long past the point where we can just, humor them because maybe they'll screw up along the way. We know what they're doing. We know where they're going. So we can't comply with anything. We've got to keep pushing back. And on every single front, we need to push back. The one thing that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have a very golden rule that applies to at least Russia and all dictators. You give an inch, they'll take a mile. You
Hmm.
can't give an inch, you can't give a centimeter. I don't care how small the act is, you have to push back because you know what? It may be irrelevant at that moment, or it might not apply to you because it's, another group of people or a different situation. But if you don't push back, believe me, even mega supporters are going to be caught up in this. I mean, with dictators, they don't have any lines. Loyalty stopped very short with them, and everyone who knows or follows Russia, sees how many people get thrown out of a window
Right.
on
I mean,
a
it's a very good
on a
point you're
monthly
making. Because
basis.
people might want to avoid the confrontation right now. They might see something happening to other people and they don't want to get involved. But truthfully, it's going to get much worse from here, and
We
it's going to
haven't
start
even
affect.
seen it. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
and it's going
haven't
to start
seen.
affecting everybody, including you, including your loved ones, including your family. So everyone's plight, no matter who it is, it's everyone's plight. So if you're seeing, you might think the El Salvador situation isn't your situation, but it is your situation because those are the same due process rights that you deserve, that you would also expect, that are being taken away. And the more we allow them to take away every inch of our right, they're going to start taking away our entire existence, which you've seen
And
in Russia.
And to add to this, look, Putin seized power, and I can tell you if you watched Putin during the 90s, I mean, it was like watching paint dry on a wall. The man had no charisma, nothing. I mean, it was such a boring figure. Um, but, he seized power. Well, not seized. Let me rephrase that. The KGB/FSB put him into power. They
Hmm.
had a handful of people they were debating between. And it was due to, basically them blowing up apartment buildings to kill Russians. So they blow up these apartment buildings, create a series of terrorist attacks, kill 300, I believe it was 18 Russians, um, and then suddenly, and blame the Chechens. Meanwhile, it was Russia's security services who you know blew up their own citizens. So
Hmm.
they create the Chechens. This is how
There's
Putin
terror
becomes
checks.
popular, and this
Mm.
is how the second Chechen war begins. And at the time people ignored it because it's like, oh, they're going after the Chechens, they're not us.
Yeah,
Well, how long did it take
they
before
get to
it's
you,
like
right?
it
They just
in
get to you.
the whole country? So that's
Yeah.
why you have to pay attention. And, if the United States right now is disappearing people off of the street, no paperwork, no documentation, no evidence, no courts. Trust me, today it is Venezuelans, tomorrow it's going to be people like me and others who are speaking out. And if we
If
don't
yeah,
push back now, it's going to only escalate.
absolutely. The minute they realize that these, disappearances, these vanishes are accepted by society, or they can get away with them, the minute they believe that they can send people to El Salvador on the suspicions. Oh, there I go again. On the suspicions that, Oi. I wonder why that's
Come
happening.
back.
Uh, okay, hopefully this works. Hopefully stays throughout the show. But there's a sense here that the more they do this, the more they'll do more of it, and it's not going to end until they have complete control over everything that you say, think, do, and act on. And this is what you know, this is the most frightening part of this, I guess, is what Elon Musk is doing at DOGE, and this kind of this accelerated theft of our data, which people may, it's not something we can see. It's not something that we are able to see the results of right away. But now that we know through this whistleblower that it's really happening, that people went into the US government databases, and we believe through Russian IP addresses, we're able to siphon off a large amount of data unencumbered, unnoticed through Starlink, all the way to Russia, perhaps. This is a frightening development, obviously, because it means that there is something else brewing in the background, which is much more dangerous. That could ultimately, we talk about these rights and about people being sent to El Salvador, but we don't quite understand the power of all this data when they're able to take it and then cross-reference it and what they can achieve by doing that. Can you talk a little bit more about the great piece you wrote this week about exactly this, about how there is a surveillance state that they're building to accommodate, to support this dictatorship?
Yeah, so the Russia part is very interesting. I am more concerned of, what is happening on the bigger scale because the past, since Trump took power again, I have been documenting in the tyranny tracker every single day, different
Hmm.
abuses and whatnot. And the reason I'm doing it, at first I was going to do it quietly, and then I'm like, let me just do it publicly because maybe you might see something that doesn't click with me, but might help you because you're putting it together with something else.
It's exactly what happened.
Um,
That's why I started, but I wrote my series that I'm doing right now.
oh.
I I saw it in the Trump tyranny tracker, and I was like, look at all these things. Look at all these things that seem to be happening coincidentally. So, yeah, sorry to
So
interrupt you, but go
I've
ahead.
been compiling, and the reason that I do it is because I look for patterns. I'm an
Hmm.
analyst, I'm a researcher, and just in general, I always work to look for patterns. And in this situation, I started seeing a lot of patterns, with Musk and his, hackers. They want our social security data. They want our IRS data. They want Department of Justice data, and they want everything. I mean, people, child support passport data, HHS data, every single thing you can think of. This is the data that they want. And I'm like, this is something weird. Now, I knew that this, unauthorized fake Doge would cover for something. I mean, when they announced this Doge and that they're going to go and cut, waste, fraud, and whatever the other gaslighting that they're
Yeah.
doing, I was
All
like,
this
this is
waste.
not, yeah,
Mm,
I was like, this is not what that is for. I mean,
mm,
trust me, Trump couldn't give a shit less if, the government is spending $20 trillion on something. He doesn't care. The man is
yeah,
a con man. He wants to figure out how to get rich, how to profit, how to seize power.
exactly.
Now, what the reason that it all came together, and I've suspected it for a while, but I am very careful and like to put together evidence, and I don't want to just throw scandalous, sensationalistic things out unless
Mm,
I'm kind of certain that I've, kind of dismissed everything else, all other possibilities. And what I came to the conclusion of is that Doge, I suspect, is cover for building a surveillance state, like in Russia, like in China. I can't speak to China. I know they have a very sophisticated surveillance state. I can speak to Russia, and I mean, in Russia, you you literally, if you're on the phone, and mention something, you hear click on the phone, or they'll just disconnect the phone call if you go into
mm,
somewhere they don't want you to
mm,
go, followed by a visit from authorities. Um, and what I noticed is that taking all this data from each agency is powerful enough because it houses data on us, different aspects of us.
mm.
But if you fuse all this
I'm
data
still
and
here.
you
Go ahead. Yeah, keep going. Sorry, I don't know why that
come
keeps happening.
back, if
Weird.
you fuse all this data from different agencies and
Mm,
then run it through an AI system, then you could put together a very complete dossier on the person, everything, how long they keep jobs for. Are they ones who, skip jobs? Or do they have, what kind of criminal history do they have? What, IRS? I mean, everything. And plus, build a profile on you, how you vote, who your family is, how your family votes, how often do you communicate with your family, and whatnot. And I think that Doge is the cover for this. And what is scary is that the federal workers, the international students, and the immigrants are the test cases.
mhm.
So, what I've noticed since February is that Doge basically installed all these things in every single agency to root out, anyone, any dissent and any disloyalty to Trump. And they have been monitoring their communications, their keystrokes, their phone calls, their emails, everything, to the point that, one article I read that people are going into the bathroom to have a conversation with the water running, like good old
Yeah,
spy movie days,
yeah.
where you avoid surveillance by
It's
turning on the water.
It's exactly what's happening. I think it's at the EPA that they're so nervous that Elon Musk is busy screening their conversations, which they can do.
Every
That,
agency,
yeah. So
every.
this is a real concern that people are having. But what you're describing here, it's so hard to put it into words because the intensity, firstly, the scale of what they're doing is so vast. They're getting information from so many sources. Not to mention the fact they already have their own private banks of information, but
And
now they're
this is
getting,
how Russia runs. This is
yeah.
exactly with Russia.
So by
Russia has a
grabbing.
file,
Mm.
and that's it. They can tell you everything from the day you were born to every single thing in your life.
And the reason
Same
why
thing.
democracies work the way they do and they silo all this information is exactly this reason. You don't want to give any single individual the power to go and use someone's health to blackmail them against their businesses, or to use someone's business to blackmail them against their health, or whatever it is. You want to be able to keep these things separate. So when you file your tax return and you have information there that is just intended for your taxes, well, then it should stay with them, because they don't need to know that you're maybe supporting someone off the books or whatever it is. That you maybe have a mistress on the side or something like that. That might be available to the IRS, but it isn't necessarily available to everybody. But what they're going to be able to do by taking the health records of government workers, by looking at the taxes that people earn, what they're going to be able to take from people's the Treasury Department information, they're going to be able to get a picture of exactly who you are and who your family is, and they will use it to blackmail you, or to use any other method that they have, like deportation or criminal charges, or you name it, against you. We've sort of seen it now with Tish James in New York, who is investigating Donald Trump for the insider trading. What happens to her yesterday? She's now under investigation for mortgage fraud. How did they know she's potentially, done that? Which we don't think she has, but let's say they were able to find out. They would only know by going in and looking at some of her IRS records, looking at the Treasury records, looking and seeing and comparing those things. So this is not going to be a quid pro quo where you say something in public, maybe, or in private, about politics, and maybe someone comes and slaps you on the wrist and says, don't say that thing in public. It could be that you say something in public or private, but then something happens to you at work, or something happens to you somewhere else, and it's
Absolutely.
disconnected.
Absolutely. In Russia, if you make a comment, for instance, now, there have been many cases, you make a comment, like, oh, I don't like this, so, Russia being at war with Ukraine. Not even an extremist comment, but
Hmm.
just like a simple comment, like, I just wish we weren't at war with Ukraine.
Hmm.
If security services, get a hold of that comment, even if it was done in your home, they
Hmm.
will go to your job. They will yank you out. And this is how the Soviet Union operated. This is how what my parents went through. My mom's biggest heartbreak was that she got her first job because they were on a list. And I'll get to that, what these surveillance things are for. But they were on a list. And she, because my dad, was an activist underground in Ukraine,
Hmm.
questioning communism, and she got come back.
I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. So I'm gonna keep. I don't know why
um
it's happening, but it just
and
is.
and she got her first job at a university bookstore, and she was so absolutely happy. And this really, I mean, still it's as vivid to her as it just happened. And
Hmm.
she goes to this new job, all excited that she has a job, and KGB comes in, grabs her out,
Wow.
takes her to KGB headquarters in Kiev, and they interrogate her and whatever. And now the
They
reason,
interrogated her for
oh, I
what?
mean, they
What
will
was the reasoning?
constantly. The reasoning is because they could. There is no
Regress.
reasoning. The reasoning is because they could, and I mean the KGB used to. If they left the house, they would walk in the house. They'd make sure that people, that when they came back, they knew that someone was in their house. This is because the games they play, and they want to make sure that you're constantly uncomfortable and paranoid. And I mean, they
Afraid.
created a very paranoid society.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll get to and what I wanted to talk about the target list. So Europe, in the article I included, Europe has, very comprehensive data privacy laws. These laws did not come out of nowhere. These laws were partly as a result of what Hitler did. Because they never wanted to have any, government that would be able to collect so much information on you where they can create lists. And I don't know with Nazi Germany, I know they had the list and whatnot, but I can very clearly tell you what happened in the Soviet Union and Russia. You are constantly categorized on a list. And once you're on a target list, in Russia used to be the blacklist, it still is the blacklist, you can't get a job. You can't, you can't do anything. Your life is destroyed. Or if you get a job, you have the scene of, the KGB showing up at your work and yanking you out. And this is what I worry here, because once they collect all this data and have these dossiers, they can then, through AI, compile them and put them in different tiers and categorize them and create different lists for whatever it is. So when they do want to have a crackdown, before people even start speaking out, like, oh, this group or this is the target list, we need to approach them to try to quash dissent before they even attempt to do it. I
Exactly
mean, I
right.
am
Yeah.
extremely, extremely, when it comes to surveillance, I am extremely paranoid. I mean, because this is something that is happening in Russia. I mean, I know, a journalist who had a freaking, she wrote something critical, and she had to went to the authorities to report it because she was getting death threats from Chechen thugs,
Hmm.
from Kadyrov thugs. And basically the interior ministry told her, well, maybe you shouldn't write this, and she had to flee because her life was in danger. Another journalist, wrote a story and had basically, this substance in a canister thrown into the house with her daughter and mother, where they had to escape the house again, had to flee the country. I mean, these things, people killed. These things are very serious, and that's why I want, my biggest panic was that they were going to create a surveillance system, and I think this is what DOGE is doing, and that
Hmm.
they're using the cover of, whatever, fraud, waste, whatever it is, to get access to all these systems and testing it out, because at the same time they're also scrubbing social media. They could see what you're tweeting, who you communicate, how many times you communicate. Right now it's geared at international students. Trust me, this can be redirected in a minute to us.
Absolutely, and it's very
If it's
sophisticated
not,
technology. Yeah,
if it's
you know, the,
not.
yeah, the I'm sure it's already targeting at citizens. The one thing that really tweaked my interest when I was reading your tracker was the Palantir thing. Palantir is a very powerful device that has been used in military. It's created by Peter Thiel's company, um, and that what they've used this in military forces is to take databases of different information about your enemy mostly. So terrorists who might be fighting in Afghanistan. There I go again. I don't know why this is happening. Sorry. Um, but they would take these disparate databases, and Palantir is able to merge all these databases together in real time. So for if you're your American troops chasing a terrorist in Afghanistan, your augmented reality would immediately tell you who's the terrorist and who isn't, who's the target, and combine all this information quickly. But that's when you're fighting terrorists. When you're dealing with the same kind of technology that Elon Musk is using now to build a mega API, which means basically all of the information that they're gathering is going to be shared across this one very powerful platform that Palantir makes. Well, now you're going to know that they're going to have this instantaneous ability to research people, to understand who the targets are, to have a complete understanding of who you are and why you're, in their mind, a threat to them. And that's where it gets really concerning when you think about the disappearances and the lack of due process and the damage they're doing to the courts, and why on a very real time basis this is appearing to happen now in the United States.
Yeah, and then with the disappearances, of course, there's no power dictatorship without an Eric Prince. And
Hmm.
apparently, Eric Prince pitched a plan, which is why I suspect Trump keeps talking about disappearing now Americans. Um, Pitched a plan, which is kind of very chilling, to Trump, that basically would designate part of the El Salvador prison as U.S. territory, to bypass the courts here in the States. And so now,
They're yeah.
can you imagine this? And this is why, like, we all look, we need to push back as hard as we can. I mean, me, I'll go fighting to the last breath. But at the same time, we need to understand what we are facing, and, make sure, like, people need to wake up. They need to start pushing back very hard against this, because once they take over, I mean, it begins to snowball. And I personally am one that you can throw a dictator over at any time, because in Russia it's a different story. I mean, people are more like sheep and they just go with the flow. And it's been like this under Stalin, under, the Tsars. But the earlier you push back against a dictator, the less likelihood they'll have to succeed and grab full power. But
That's
I'm one,
exactly
you
right.
keep going until the end. I mean, in Ukraine, you
Yeah.
saw two revolutions, and they were successful. So I mean, we need
You got
to,
to
but
you need to fight right away. When you look at like Mao, you look at Stalin, you look um, at Hitler. Even the amount of time it takes for a dictator to solidify power is not actually as long as you would think. It's within 6 months those leaders were able to completely cement their dictatorial powers, and we can see how fast Trump is moving right now. So we don't have a big window here, really. I mean, you can stop him after the fact. Normally, that ends up being very difficult, but it's war and other situations. But in the next few months, we probably have the most opportunity to do something before all the DOGE systems are in place and before they've been able to siphon off all this information and before they've got so much wariness in this population that people are going to sort of give up to some of what they're doing. We talk about the El Salvador prisons, but there are indications they're building prisons across this entire
yeah, everywhere.
country.
Yeah.
The southern border is becoming a military base precisely for this reason, so they can not have to follow the rule of law in any of these places. We're seeing that rule of law disappear before our very eyes. When Donald Trump is not listening to what a court is telling him in terms of facilitating the return of a citizen from El Salvador. I mean, it seems ridiculous. It seems absolutely insane that this is the president of the United States not doing that. But this is in fact what's happening. And so this window is very crucial.
But what is insane, I have to honestly push back with the regular media. What is insane is, you know, look, people like me and you have been screaming that Trump, has authoritarian tendencies for a decade now.
Mm.
The media finally caught on, after the insurrection, and, kind of understood that this is not just a normal, president, that there's something there. Um, and then, him becoming a dictator, the threat of dictatorship became more common last year. But the problem is with this, you know, I mean, the Democrats ran on it and said, "Oh, Trump is a dictator," and the pundits spoke about Trump being a dictator. The problem is that at the same time, and this is where this disconnect is because they've never, thank God, experienced it, but the problem is, you cannot say Trump is the dictator, and then at the same time, and all the institutionalists on TV say, "Oh, well, he can't do that. That's illegal, and this is breaking the
Mm.
Constitution."
Right.
I mean,
Of course.
dictators that don't have constitutions, they write their constitutions or they
Yeah.
change or alter the Constitution. Trump right now is saying a violent criminal will be disappear to El Salvador. What is violent in his head? I mean, in our head, we have one meaning of violent. In his head, someone like me might be violent for pushing back against him and
Absolutely.
speaking out.
Dissent is qualified as being violence in his head, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Anyone standing up to him. So,
Exactly.
yeah. I grew up in South Africa. You've had your experiences in Ukraine and the former Soviet Union. There is so much. We're activated. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm activated by not ever wanting to live in that again. I've spent the last 10 years fighting against Donald Trump because I know what this means. I know what Donald Trump will bring to America, especially considering the amount of South Africans that are involved in that whole push that they're doing to America. Sorry. So we need to stand up. This is an opportunity now that Americans have to really live up to who they are, to the founding fathers' mission, to the idea that this is a unique experiment in the world. I mean, there's no other country like America that has such a unique constitution that allows people to, to have the rights that we have, that we the people have those rights enshrined from the minute we're born. And so we need to remember how important and valuable these are. Sometimes it's really easy to forget. Or maybe you've never experienced an autocratic system in your life, but trust me, when you live in one, there is nothing more pernicious than you can imagine. It eats away at every part of your life. It eats away. You're so paranoid for one thing, but also your relationships, your family. When I was at school, I was an activist at a young age. The police showed up at my parents' door. I was 17 years old, and they were like, your kid is involved in something really bad over here. Let's throw him in jail." Like there's a lot going on in societies like that is terrifying. So it's not even what you can control; it's what your family might be doing. It's what someone might have said accidentally in some place. You might get into a fight with your boss, who might be a party person. Any of these things can create, because it's not only Trump, right? It's Trump building an entire system, an entire uh, government based on instilling fear and pushing power down your throat. It's not the same as we have had in the past. People have to really understand that what's going on is a dramatic upheaval of the way we have been living. That it's not anything like life in the United States has been up until now. It's in fact the exact opposite. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about that and your experiences in Russia as well, because I think it's such a
Yeah,
it's a fascinating thing.
absolutely. Look, you know, like I said, Americans luckily have never had to deal with a dictator.
Mhm,
They've never had to deal with, government overreach. I mean, what here is considered government overreach is like
mhm,
considered normal government functioning, like, in other parts of the world.
mhm,
And it's a good thing that America has never had to deal with this because, people left here. I mean, my parents fled the Soviet Union, and I never thought that I'd be fighting this shit here.
mhm,
Um, so it's a good thing that they never had to experience. On the other hand, it's terrifying because they don't know what it means and what is coming. I do think, I'm one that you never stop. And I think, like you mentioned, what's happening with universities before and law firms. The problem is, and Harvard, is pushing back. And now you have other universities. The problem was with, for instance, Columbia, that they decided to give an inch, and now we'll see how far that goes. Harvard didn't. And you have now basically the Big Ten universities in the United States who are creating a defense pact, like a NATO, for
mhm.
universities
Yeah.
to stand by each other. And this is the correct way because then once you have big numbers, once you have, a collective group of people pushing back, then it is harder for a dictator to operate. And I always say, there's more of us than them. I mean, here in this country, even if, 5 million people, which is of a small percentage of the
Mm,
country, really took this serious and said, absolutely not. We're not going to have a fascist surveillance, authoritarian state. Even 5 million people. I
mm,
mean, this is probably, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 more times bigger than what they have in their
mhm.
power.
It's such an
And that's
important
why
point.
I believe, with the universities, I mean, this is amazing because the fact that 10 universities came together and will assist each other in pushing back in case any of them, and basically it's like a NATO pact. You come
Mhm,
for one, you come for all of us. And
mhm.
that means that they're going to share their financial resources to fight back, their lawyers, everything to fight back and push back. and
And
and this needs to happen with law firms, with everything, every single thing. People need to band together because when you band together, it's going to be much harder for them to succeed.
and with the people as well, if if you
Yeah,
have a group of friends, a community group, if you can start protesting in your communities in a way, or start resisting in a community in a coordinated way, you're going to be much stronger than if you're just doing it on your own. So don't be afraid of reaching out to people. There are millions and millions and millions, way more than half of the country that is desperately fearful of the same thing you're fearful of, and wants to push back against Donald Trump. People are scared, but we can beat them because we are many more than them. There's no
a
doubt
lot
that people
more.
don't want to enter this world that he's dragging us all into. So, the opportunity here is to reach out to your friends in a grassroots way, to connect with them, make sure you meet your neighbors, get to know your neighbors. You're going to need them. Make sure you need to know, your colleagues at work, and figure out when, if maybe you're in a work sector where you might come into contact with some of this of the regime. There are ways to push back in a secret way, in a covert way. Who knows? Maybe we'll need to get to the point where we're actually hiding people away from the police so that they aren't disappeared and taken to El Salvador. We might be in that situation, but let's think about how we do that and coordinate with everybody, so we have a grassroots movement that lifts up from the ground up. That's the way you build these things, and that's the way they are. That's the thing that they're most terrified of, is this grassroots swelling up. And as you point out, there's so many people in America. You don't need 30, 40 million. You just need a
No.
million people. Will shock them.
1 million.
Yeah.
I used to laugh because people used to talk about, oh, look at the protest, in 17 and 19. I mean, God bless them. But look at
Hmm.
the protest in Moscow. 10,000 people came out. I'm like, 10,000 people. And of course, you see like an army of freaking thugs dressed
Hmm.
in black with, riot gear. And of course, you see them yanking people into, and packing the buses up to wheel them away from in Moscow. Um, and I'm like, this is a joke because I mean, if 1 million people came out in Moscow, they would step on every single FSB officer and Guardia and break into the Kremlin
Hmm.
and rip that freaking dwarf out of his freaking hiding, rip him into pieces, including everyone. I mean, people banding together is power. And I can just give you one example in
Hmm.
Ukraine. You know, particularly during Maidan, people were pushing back against Yanukovych. He betrayed and went against the constitution to move the country towards Russia. And civil society sprung into action so quick that literally, and it was happening on the go. I mean,
Hmm.
really, it was happening on the go, to the point it got so organized that a town, on the other side of Ukraine, you activate people, and every town people will immediately, like the local activists will round everyone out, and everyone's out in the streets. That is how quick, the system is set up there, where civil society, at any moment something happens, immediately text messages out, everyone comes to the street, starts organizing shifts, cooking food, to make sure that people aren't hungry while they're
Hmm.
protesting, and will stay in the streets day, night, afternoon, working shifts, because it's part of their civic duty. And the other thing I want to say is the importance of protest is beyond here pushing back. The importance is to show face to the rest of the world, because right now
Hmm.
they don't look at it as, oh, Trump is the one doing this, and well, 70 something million, voted for him, and this amount voted for Harris. So therefore, these people, they are painting, whether it's Europe or Canada or anyone, they are painting it as all Americans are responsible. And there is
Absolutely.
nothing more heartwarming for the rest of the world. And I can tell you, seeing it, images like coming out of Tbilisi or Hungary or Serbia right now, when you see people gathering in the square and showing the whole world, we are not going to stand up for this. And this is
Absolutely.
what needs to happen.
And that's why
And
this
it's
it was this
happening, and it's
yeah.
growing.
And this weekend on Saturday, the 5051 movement,
Yes.
50501, people need to check out the website, is, by the way, 5050 dot one, O-N-E at the end there instead of your usual .com. Go find your protest in your state because, or in your city. There are going to be protests everywhere. But the idea is to build a groundswell of people that can do this and can do this quickly. And people who think, well, I can wait to do this next week or next month or next year, you don't actually have that luxury of time anymore. It's happening. It's such a fast pace. If I'm telling you that there's weeks, I think that there's weeks, maybe months, but it's not long. We have to push back now in order to be successful. We've seen how these protests have been so successful in places like Romania. We've seen how, and in Georgia and places like that, they've been so successful at times, and we need to be able to get that same kind of energy in the ground, on the ground as well, because we really need to stop this before they take complete hold. They don't have everything yet. They're starting to feel their way into the systems. They're starting to dismantle our normal due process, our normal rights, but they don't have it yet. We still have a very robust judiciary. We have judges that are pushing back full force now, which is so good to see. We have universities that are pushing back. Everybody needs to start really resisting what's going on to a point where they can't have any of these options that they think they have, where they just can't do what they're doing. And to your credit, and thank you so much for sharing all your experiences in the Soviet
Likewise,
Union.
same.
My pleasure. And it's just so good to hear from people who know what the threat is and how scary it is to be getting into this world, but how much more terrifying it will be if you don't do this. So, go out this week, find out how your protests are happening. Make sure that you are safe and you're in a non-threatening environment at all times. Don't be violent, but make sure you're there and you're present and you're starting to rise up against this thing that's coming, because we don't have a long time. And the alternative is terrifying. We are staring at it. If we don't push this government out and we don't push this effort down, we're facing world wars. We're facing a horrific
Oh,
future for you, for
dystopia.
your kids, for everybody. That we can see it happening already. Absolutely dystopian. So now is the time. People really need to take this seriously. It's happening clearly, and we need to move on. And so I know you make this quite short, so I'll let you say whatever you need to say as a closing remark here.
I'm just going to keep repeating, you don't want to live in a country where you have to worry about your children disappearing, your family members disappearing because they said the wrong thing that criticized the regime. You see Trump how he is. I mean, he doesn't like something that someone said, and he is using the powers of the government. I mean, Harvard, this is when I talk about weaponizing, and I started my Trump tyranny tracker with power consolidation, weaponization of agencies,
Mhm.
how you call it, media and authoritarian tactics, knowing fully when I started where this movie is going.
Mhm.
And the fact that you have Harvard and Trump is weaponizing the IRS, the DHS, literally every agency to go after an institute. He's doing the same thing in Maine. Why is he fighting with Maine? Why is he using every single government agency to go after Maine? Not because they're, of transgender rights, because the Maine governor humiliated him at the
Mhm.
governor's meeting in February in the White House and told him basically, fuck off, I'll see you in court, when he
Mhm.
was threatening her. He could not forget that. And since February, literally, they're throwing everything short of sending the National Guard to arrest her. They're throwing everything at her. And this is from the fact, like I said, Trump doesn't care about transgender.
Mhm.
These are all smoke screens to one, test their tactics, two, to try to activate his base and mega and fight these culture wars while they consolidate power. um and that's it. So that is my thing, like organize, organize, organize. Find your local movement, grassroots movement, sign up, volunteer, do whatever you can. If you could pitch 2 hours a week, wonderful. If you could do a day a week, wonderful. If you can draw, what are they called, those protest signs, or you can like find your own strength where you're comfortable in
Mhm.
your lane to help with this.
Yeah, this is definitely the most difficult time America and probably the world has seen in over 100 years, probably much longer. This is an opportunity to meet that moment and make a moment for yourself and for just to leave a legacy and to protect your future generations and to also celebrate the many people who've died fighting for this very same freedom in the for hundreds of years, whether it's in America or not. People have been This freedom is very cherished, and we
I
need to
have
hold on to
faith
it.
in America. I have
I
faith
do too.
because we've gone through the civil rights movement here and the women's right movement, and it's always that push and pull. But when things mattered, people came out. So I do think people are going to come out. And just watching the scene of Chuck Grassley in Iowa, red, deep.
Mm,
Iowa being attacked by his Republicans. These
it's good to
weren't
see.
activists. These
Mm,
were Republicans, older people, Iowans who were pushing back about Garcia, who is in El Salvador. So I mean
yeah.
people are paying attention, and once everyone comes together, I am confident we will be. It's not going to be an easy ride, but we will be able to push back against this.
And one of the best ways to keep in touch with what's going on every single day is the Trump Tyranny Tracker. It's one of the most useful Substacks I've ever seen, and I use it regularly. It inspired my latest series that you see on my Substack. But everyone should really sign up for Trump Tyranny Tracker that Olga does. She works so hard at this, and people should also, everyone sees that subscribe button, and everyone subscribes. But you should consider also becoming a paid subscriber because it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication by people like Olga to really get their word out. And if you can afford it, get a paid subscription
Thank
to
you.
Olga's work because she
And
works so
same to
hard.
you. Same
And
to
yes,
you, and same
yeah,
everyone needs to
yeah.
watch your five stack. Unfortunately, tomorrow I won't
I
be.
know. I'm sorry because it's Easter. We can't do it, but we will do. But we will do it next week. I
But
promise. I
you and
promise.
Dean, I mean, at least you every day are covering the top headlines and going behind the headlines, not just the nonsense that's on legacy media. Going behind. So, thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for saying that. Again, Trump Tyranny Tracker because I know it's important, and also
Five
the
stack.
okay, we'll keep it's great you had the time to spend with me tonight. I know you've got lots of things to do, but thank you very much, Olga Lautman. Everyone needs to follow her, and everyone, be safe out there this weekend. But don't think you can wait on this one. This one is
And
important.
if you
It,
can't protest because you're celebrating a holiday,
yeah,
find your family members and start chewing their ear off. Maybe
yeah,
if they're pro Trumpers, don't talk about Trump, but just say, oh my God, did you hear Social Security is collapsing or Medicare is collapsing? And kind of whatever it is that might jolt them into, moving out of the mega zone. So for people who can't make a protest, do some good service on
yeah.
this holiday weekend to
Church,
try to
yeah, and churches.
deprogram.
Yeah, it's good, and churches also have been, very impressive places for protests in other countries. These are the kind of institutions that hold up. So, go find your community. Go find your community and start doing it. Olga Lautman, thanks so much. I know you got to go. Thank you very much for being here tonight, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you soon on Narrative and on Substack Live. Cheers, everybody.
Bye.